Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive council chamber. The room was so large that his voice would have been lost without the translation devices. Above him, hundreds of alien beings sat in floating platforms, looking down at the human representative with expressions that ranged from boredom to open disgust. The Zenthari speaker clicked his crystal-like fingers against his podium. His voice came through the translators with a cold, mechanical tone. The human proposal for trade route access is denied. Again. We have told you many times that your species lacks the emotional control needed for such important work. Jake felt his jaw tighten. This was the 15th proposal that Earth had made in the past year. Each one had been rejected for different reasons, but the real reason was always the same. The Council saw humans as children playing at being adults. With respect, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Humanity has contributed significantly to galactic peace efforts. Our medical team saved over 1 million hegemony citizens during the plague outbreak. Our engineers built the orbital stations around Kepler 442b in half the time your projections suggested. A ripple of what might have been laughter went through the alien assembly. The hegemony representative, a being that looked like a cross between an octopus and a tree, waved several tentacles dismissively. Yes, humans are good at taking orders and following instructions. But leadership requires wisdom that comes with age. Your species has barely left its home system. Lisa Campbell watched from the observation deck above. As Earth's military advisor to the Council, she had seen this same scene play out dozens of times. The aliens would praise human work ethic and dedication, then turn around and treat them like hired help. She looked at the datapad in her hands, reviewing the latest trade restrictions that would cut off 3 human colonies from critical medical supplies. The Epsilon trade routes are restricted to Council members with at least 50 years of galactic citizenship, the Zenthari continued. Humanity has been a member for only 32 years. Perhaps in another generation you will be ready for such responsibility. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The Epsilon routes weren't just about money. The colonies on the outer rim depended on those trade lines for everything from food to medicine. Without access, people would die. Real people with families and dreams and hopes for the future. Speaker Vexlar, Jake said, addressing the Council's leader directly. These aren't just trade routes we're discussing. These are lifelines for human settlements. We're asking for basic fairness, not special treatment. The massive creature that served as Council speaker raised himself higher on his platform. Vexlar was old, even by galactic standards. His species had been part of the Council for over 800 years. To him, humans were barely more than talking animals who had learned to use technology. Fairness, Vexlar repeated, his voice carrying a tone of patient explanation, like an adult explaining something obvious to a child. Fairness is earned through wisdom and self-control. Your species still settles disputes through violence. You wage wars against your own kind. How can we trust you with the economic stability of entire sectors? Around the chamber, other representatives nodded their agreement. The cat-like Felinians preened their whiskers in what Jake had learned was a sign of smug satisfaction. The crystalline collective hummed in harmony, their voices creating an annoying background noise that somehow managed to sound condescending. We call for a vote, announced the Zenthari speaker, all in favor of denying humanity access to the Epsilon trade routes. Jake watched as platform after platform lit up with affirmative votes. The tally appeared on the main display. 847 votes in favor, 1 vote against. Only Earth had voted for its own proposal. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake looked up at the hundreds of alien faces staring down at him. Some looked satisfied. Others seemed almost bored, as if this had been a foregone conclusion. None of them looked like they understood what they had just done. Lisa Campbell stood up in the observation deck. She walked down the steps slowly, her military boots clicking against the polished floor. When she reached Jake's side, she handed him a small device. "What's this?" Jake asked quietly. "Emergency authorization codes," Lisa whispered back. "From Earth Command. You have full authority to act as you see fit." Jake looked at the device, then up at the assembled council. These beings had made their position clear. Humanity would always be the junior partner, the species that did the work while others made the decisions. They would never be equals here. He reached up and removed the translation collar from around his neck. The small device clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet chamber. Members of the Galactic Council, Jake said in clear English. His words were picked up by the emergency translators built into the chamber, but there was a delay. For a few seconds, he spoke only to any humans who might be listening. For 32 years, humanity has tried to be good citizens of this galaxy. We have followed your rules, respected your traditions, and contributed our blood, sweat, and knowledge to the common good. In return, you have treated us like servants who should be grateful for the privilege of serving. The translations finally kicked in, and Jake could see confusion spreading through the alien faces above him. This wasn't how these meetings usually went. Today you have voted to deny medical supplies to human children because you think we need to learn patience. You have decided that human lives matter less than your arbitrary rules about worthiness. Jake's voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. The human delegation formally withdraws from this council. We came here seeking partnership and found only condescension. We offered friendship and received only demands for subservience. He picked up his briefcase and turned toward the exit. Lisa fell into step beside him, her face set in hard lines. Perhaps, Jake said over his shoulder, it's time we reminded the galaxy what humanity is truly capable of when we're not trying to please everyone else. As they walked toward the massive doors, Speaker Vexler's voice boomed through the chamber. You cannot survive without the Council's protection. Your colonies will fail. Your trade will collapse. You will come crawling back within a year begging for readmission. Jake paused at the doorway and looked back one last time. We'll see about that. The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder. In the council chamber, the alien representatives sat in stunned silence. Then slowly, the normal business of galactic politics resumed. After all, how much trouble could one small species really cause? 3 years had passed since the human delegation walked out of the council chambers. In all that time, not a single message had come from human space. No requests for help, no desperate pleas for readmission, no reports of the economic collapse that everyone had predicted. The silence was starting to worry some of the more thoughtful council members. Dr. Alex Carter stood in the observation deck of the Centauri research station, looking out at the massive construction project taking shape in space. Where once there had been only empty void, now there was a sprawling complex of shipyards, laboratories, and manufacturing facilities. The work never stopped. Day and night, human engineers and automated systems worked together to build something the galaxy had never seen before. How are the tests going? Asked Commander Ryan Torres as he joined Alex at the viewing window. Better than we hoped, Alex replied, pulling up a holographic display. The new shield technology is 30% more efficient than anything the Council uses. And the power systems, he paused, shaking his head in amazement. We're generating more energy per unit than should be theoretically possible. Ryan nodded, watching as another massive ship frame was moved into position. The Council always said we were too young, too emotional, too unpredictable. They never bothered to ask what makes us different. They just assumed different meant inferior. The ship taking shape before them was unlike anything in Council space. Where alien vessels favored flowing curves and elegant designs, this was all angles and efficient lines. It looked like what it was. A machine built for a specific purpose by people who understood that form should always follow function. What did the Deep Scouts report? Alex asked. Captain Santos is due back tomorrow. Her team has been mapping Council defensive positions for the past 6 months. From what we can tell, they haven't improved their security at all since we left. Alex wasn't surprised. The Council had enjoyed peace for over 200 years. They had grown comfortable, maybe even lazy. Their ships were designed more for showing off than for fighting. Their defenses were built to impress visitors, not to stop determined attackers. Not that humanity was planning to attack anyone, but it never hurt to be prepared. On the other side of human space, Captain Maria Santos was indeed preparing for her return journey. Her ship, the Explorer, had spent months moving through the edges of Council territory. They had been careful, using new stealth technology that made them nearly invisible to standard sensors. What they had found was both encouraging and troubling. Encouraging because the Council's defenses were even weaker than Earth's intelligence had suggested. Troubling because those same defenses were all that stood between civilization and the various hostile forces that lurked in the galaxy's dark corners. Ma'am, called her sensor operator. We're picking up another Council patrol. Same route as always, same timing. Maria nodded. The Council's military followed patterns that hadn't changed in decades. They patrolled the same routes at the same times, using the same communication frequencies. It was the behavior of a military that had forgotten what actual threats looked like. "Take us deeper into the asteroid field," she ordered. "We'll wait for them to pass, then continue our survey." As the explorer slipped silently between the floating rocks, Maria thought about the reports she would soon be delivering to Earth Command. The Council wasn't just unprepared for war. They had forgotten that war was even possible. They spent their time on trade disputes and territorial arguments that would have been settled with guns in the old days. Maybe that was what humanity brought to the galaxy. Not just technology or determination, but the memory of what it meant to fight for survival. Humans had never forgotten that peace was something you had to protect, not something you could just assume would last forever. Back on Earth, President Nathan Blake was meeting with his senior advisors in a conference room deep beneath the Capitol. The walls were lined with screens showing the progress of dozens of secret projects: ship construction, weapons testing, diplomatic intelligence, economic planning. Humanity was preparing for its return to galactic politics with the same methodical approach they had once used to explore their own solar system. "How many ships will we have ready in 2 years?" Nathan asked. "Current projections show just over 1,000 combat-ready vessels," replied Admiral Kate Phillips. "That includes everything from escorts to dreadnoughts. We'll also have support ships, supply vessels, and mobile construction platforms." Nathan whistled softly. 1,000 ships. When humanity had first joined the Council, their entire space navy consisted of 12 outdated patrol boats. Now they were building a fleet that could challenge any power in the galaxy. "What about the other preparations?" "Economic systems are in place," reported Secretary Coleman. "We've established trade relationships with independent worlds that the Council ignores. Resource extraction is running ahead of schedule, and our diplomatic corps has been studying every species in the galaxy, learning their weaknesses and pressure points." Kate pulled up a holographic star map. Human space was marked in blue, surrounded by the various Council territories in different colors. "We've identified key strategic points throughout Council space. If we move quickly and decisively, we can position ourselves to control the flow of information and resources." "This isn't about conquest," Nathan reminded them. "It's about respect. When we return to the Council, we want them to see us as equals, not as the junior partners they can dismiss whenever it's convenient." "Understood, sir. But respect often comes from the knowledge that dismissing someone would be too costly to consider." Nathan looked around the room at his advisors. These were people who had spent 3 years working in secret, building something unprecedented in galactic history, not an empire built on conquest, but a power built on preparation and determination. "Any word from our observers in Council space?" "Nothing significant. They're still arguing about the same trade disputes they were fighting over when we left." Speaker Vexler gave another speech last week about the wisdom of patience and the importance of tradition. "No mention of humanity at all," Nathan smiled grimly. "Good, let them forget about us. When we're ready to remind them we exist, the lesson will be all the more effective." Outside the conference room windows, the lights of Earth's cities stretched to the horizon. Somewhere up there, in the orbital shipyards and research stations, thousands of people were working to ensure that humanity would never again have to beg for the basic respect that should be given to any sentient species. The Council had made a mistake when they dismissed humanity as too young and too emotional. They had forgotten that young species were also growing species, and that emotional species were often the most determined ones. Soon, they would remember. Lieutenant Sophie Harris stared at the data streaming across her console screen. Something was wrong with the readings, but she couldn't figure out what. The sensors showed empty space where her instruments insisted something large had been just hours before. "Ma'am," she called to the Zenthari station commander, "I'm getting gravitational distortions near the human border. The readings suggest massive objects were recently in those coordinates." Commander Zekthal didn't even look up from his paperwork. "Sensor ghosts. The equipment near human space has been acting up for months. File a maintenance request and stop wasting time on nothing." Sophie looked back at her screen. These weren't sensor ghosts. The gravitational readings were too specific, too organized. Something big had been out there, multiple somethings, and they had moved in formation before disappearing. She had been monitoring the human borders for 2 years now, ever since the silent zone had been established. At first, the job had been exciting. Everyone expected the humans to come crawling back, begging for readmission to the Council. Sophie had imagined herself being the first to detect their desperate communications. Instead, there had been nothing. No distress calls, no trade requests, no diplomatic messages. The humans had simply vanished from galactic politics as completely as if they had never existed. But recently things had been changing. Ships that ventured too close to human space reported strange encounters. Not attacks, just firm redirections by vessels that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. The Council assumed these were probably human patrol ships using outdated stealth technology. Sophie wasn't so sure. The energy signatures she was seeing didn't match anything in the Council database. These weren't old human designs. They were something entirely new. "Commander," she tried again, "I really think we should investigate these readings. The gravitational distortions are consistent with large fleet movements." This time Zekthal did look up, his crystal features reflecting the console lights in annoying patterns. "Lieutenant Harris, in the 5 years since the humans left, how many of their ships have we detected?" "None, sir, but..." "And how many distress signals have we received from human space?" "None, sir." Then clearly they are either dead or have retreated so far from galactic civilization that they are no longer relevant. Either way, they are not our concern. Focus on monitoring the hegemony trade routes like you're supposed to. Sophie turned back to her console, but she didn't switch to the trade route monitors. Instead, she pulled up the long-range sensor logs from the past year. What she saw made her blood run cold. The gravitational distortions weren't random. They followed patterns like a schedule. Every few weeks, massive objects would appear at the edge of human space, remain stationary for several hours, then disappear again. The readings suggested objects far larger than any ships in the Council database. She opened a new file and began documenting everything. If the commander wouldn't listen, maybe someone else would. The Council needed to know that something was happening in human space, something big. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Nathan Blake was receiving a very different kind of report. Admiral Kate Phillips stood before a holographic display showing the entire galaxy, with small blue dots marking the positions of human scout ships. "Our observers report increasing Council activity near the borders," Kate said. "Nothing aggressive, just more patrols and monitoring stations. They're starting to notice our test flights." "How much do they actually know?" Nathan asked. "Very little. Their sensors are outdated, and their analysts seem more interested in dismissing anomalies than investigating them. But there are a few individuals who are asking the right questions." Nathan nodded. He had expected this. You couldn't build a 1,000-ship fleet without eventually attracting some attention. The question was whether the Council would take the signs seriously, or continue to underestimate humanity until it was too late to matter. "What about our intelligence networks? Still in place. We have observers in every major Council facility, and our economic contacts are reporting normal activity. No emergency meetings, no military buildups, no signs that they're taking the situation seriously." "Good. How much longer until we're ready?" Kate smiled. "The final phase of construction will be complete in 6 months. All ships will be fully operational, crews will be trained, and supply lines will be established. We'll be ready to move whenever you give the order." On the outer rim of human space, Captain Sam Taylor was conducting one of the test flights that were causing so much concern on the monitoring stations. His ship, the Horizon, was one of the new intelligence vessels designed specifically for gathering information about potential enemies. "Passive scans only," Sam reminded his crew. "We're here to watch, not to be seen." The ship moved silently through space, its hull designed to absorb rather than reflect sensor beams. To most detection systems, it would appear to be nothing more than a small asteroid drifting between star systems. "Captain," called his sensor operator, "I'm picking up a Council monitoring station about 2 light hours away. They're running active scans of this sector. Let them scan. They won't see anything interesting." Sam studied the tactical display showing the Council's defensive positions. After 5 years of careful observation, humanity had mapped every Council military asset, every trade route, every communication relay. They knew where the aliens were strong and where they were weak. More importantly, they knew that the Council's greatest weakness wasn't military or economic. It was psychological. The aliens had become so comfortable with their position of dominance that they couldn't imagine being seriously challenged. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the monitoring station. They're requesting identification." "Standard response," Sam ordered. "Automated mining vessel. registration filed with the Independent Traders Association. It was a cover story that had worked dozens of times before. The council barely paid attention to independent traders, considering them too insignificant to worry about. They never bothered to check whether the registrations were real. "They're accepting the identification and moving on," the communications officer confirmed. Sam nodded. In 6 months, these same council officers would be getting a very different kind of surprise. Instead of lone survey ships pretending to be mining vessels, they would be facing a coordinated fleet operation that would announce humanity's return to galactic politics in terms that no one could ignore. Back on the monitoring station, Sophie Harris was still analyzing sensor data when something new appeared on her screen. For just a moment, her instruments detected what looked like a massive energy signature moving through space near the human border. Then it was gone, leaving only the faint gravitational traces that had become so familiar. She looked around the station. Commander Zekthal was in his office, probably sleeping. The other technicians were focused on their assigned monitoring duties, none of them paying attention to the human sectors. Sophie made a decision. She opened a secure communication channel and began composing a message to Council intelligence. Someone needed to know that humanity hadn't simply disappeared. They were out there doing something, building something, preparing for something, and whatever it was getting bigger every day. Her message disappeared into the vast council bureaucracy, where it would probably be filed away and forgotten, like so many other reports from junior officers. But at least she had tried to warn them. In human space, the final preparations continued. Soon, the galaxy would discover what 5 years of focused determination could accomplish when an entire species decided to stop asking for permission and start demanding respect. The council session had been going on for 3 hours, and Speaker Vexillar was starting to lose patience with the Zenthari trade representative. The crystal-like alien was demanding exclusive mining rights to an entire asteroid belt, which would violate treaties with at least 4 other species. The economic projections clearly showed, the Zenthari began, when every alarm in the council chambers began screaming at once. The massive viewing screens around the chamber lit up with sensor data. Red warning symbols flashed across displays as the station's defensive systems came online automatically. Through the chaos of alarms and shouting voices, one message kept repeating. Multiple large contacts emerging from hyperspace. Multiple large contacts emerging from hyperspace. Vexler raised himself to his full height on his platform. "Report, what is happening?" The station commander's voice came through the communication system, tight with barely controlled panic. "Sir, we have massive hyperspace signatures appearing throughout the system." "Ships, sir. Hundreds of them, possibly thousands. They're coming out of hyperspace in perfect formation." On the main display, the tactical view of Nexus Prime's star system began filling with contact markers. They appeared in waves, each group emerging from hyperspace with mechanical precision. First came what looked like escort vessels, sleek and angular. Then larger ships, cruiser-sized but with design elements that didn't match anything in the Council database. Finally, the big ones appeared. The dreadnoughts were massive, larger than anything the Council had ever built. Their hulls were dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Instead of the flowing curves and elegant designs favored by council races, these ships were all straight lines and efficient angles. They looked like exactly what they were, machines built by people who understood that space combat was about function, not beauty. At the center of the formation was the largest ship anyone in the council had ever seen. It dwarfed even the hegemony's ceremonial flagships, and unlike those vessels, this one was clearly built for war. Its hull bore the scars of weapons testing, deliberately left visible as a statement. "Identify the vessels," Vexler ordered, though somewhere deep in his mind he already knew the answer. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "they're broadcasting human identification codes. The flagship is identifying itself as the UES Defiance." A deadly silence fell over the council chambers. The human fleet hung in space like a dark promise, close enough to Nexus Prime's orbital defenses to demonstrate their presence, but far enough away to avoid being seen as an immediate attack. Admiral Grace Martinez stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. Every ship was exactly where it was supposed to be. The formation was perfect, the timing precise. 5 years of planning and preparation had led to this moment. "Communications," she ordered. Open a channel to the council chambers. All frequencies full power. Channel open, Admiral. Grace looked directly into the camera, knowing that her image was about to appear on every screen in the council chambers. She had chosen her words carefully, rehearsing them during the long journey to Nexus Prime. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice calm and professional. This is Admiral Grace Martinez of the United Earth Space Force. Humanity requests an audience. The reaction in the council chambers was immediate chaos. Representatives leaped from their platforms shouting questions and demands. The Xanthari delegation was frantically trying to contact their home fleet. The hegemony representatives were demanding to know how the humans had bypassed the early warning systems. Through it all, Vexlar remained motionless on his platform, staring at the human admiral on the screen. This wasn't possible. Humanity had been a small, weak species when they left 5 years ago. They had barely possessed a dozen outdated ships. Where had this fleet come from? How many ships? He asked quietly. The sensor officer's voice was barely above a whisper. Initial count shows over 800 vessels, sir. But more are still emerging from hyperspace. Current estimate is approaching 1,000 ships. 1,000 ships. The entire Council Defense Force consisted of fewer than 600 vessels, and most of those were scattered across dozens of star systems. Even if they could gather the entire fleet, they would be outnumbered. But numbers weren't the most frightening thing about this situation. The most frightening thing was the coordination. The human fleet had appeared out of nowhere, perfectly organized, clearly following a plan that had been years in the making. This wasn't a desperate gamble by a species in decline. This was a carefully planned operation by beings who had spent 5 years preparing for exactly this moment. On the escort ship Retribution, Commander Pete Johnson monitored Council military frequencies. The communications were chaos. Admirals were demanding status reports from fleets that were hours or days away. Politicians were screaming about territorial violations and acts of war. Military analysts were trying to figure out how humanity had developed such advanced ships in complete secrecy. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're intercepting emergency transmissions from Council High Command. They're ordering all available fleets to converge on Nexus Prime. Pete smiled grimly. Let them come. By the time they get here, this will all be over. The nearest Council fleet was the Xanthari 3rd Squadron, currently 6 hours away at maximum speed. The hegemony had a battle group in the next system over, but they would need at least 4 hours to arrive. By the time any significant Council force could reach Nexus Prime, the humans would have accomplished whatever they had come here to do. In the Council chambers, Jake Morrison stepped through the main entrance. He was no longer just an ambassador. Now he carried the title of Fleet Ambassador, representing not just Earth but the entire human sphere of influence. Behind him walked a small delegation of humans, each one representing a different aspect of human space: military, economic, scientific, and political. The chamber fell silent as Jake walked to the center of the floor. He looked up at the assembled alien representatives, many of whom he recognized from the humiliating sessions 5 years earlier. But the dynamic had changed completely. Where once he had stood as a supplicant, begging for consideration, now he stood as an equal demanding respect. Speaker Vexlar, Jake said formally, I bring greetings from the United Colonies of Earth and our allied worlds. We have come to discuss the terms of humanity's return to galactic civilization. Vexlar found his voice with difficulty. The terms? You appear in our system with a war fleet and speak of terms. This is a diplomatic fleet, Jake replied calmly. Every ship out there is crewed by trained diplomats as well as military personnel. We have come to negotiate, not to fight, but we have also come as equals, not as the junior partners you once dismissed. The implications of Jake's words settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The humans weren't asking for readmission to the Council. They weren't begging for the trade routes and protections they had once been denied. They were offering to return, but only on their own terms. What do you want? Vexlar asked. Jake smiled. What we've always wanted: respect, fair treatment. Recognition that humanity has as much right to participate in galactic civilization as any other species. The only difference is that now we're in a position to insist on it. Outside, the human fleet maintained its perfect formation. Dark ships against the stars, waiting patiently for their leaders to finish the negotiations that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The emergency council session began 2 hours after the human fleet's arrival. The great chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives tried to understand how dramatically their situation had changed. Outside the massive windows, the dark shapes of human warships served as a constant reminder that the old order was over. Speaker Vexler called the session to order, though his usual commanding presence seemed diminished. The council recognizes Fleet Ambassador Morrison of the human delegation. Jake stood in the center of the chamber, but this time he wasn't alone. Admiral Grace Martinez stood to his right, representing military concerns. Dr. Ellen Walsh, the chief scientist, stood to his left. Behind them, economic advisor Robert Chen and political strategist Karen Bell completed the human delegation. 5 years ago, Jake began, humanity left this council because we were treated as servants rather than partners. You denied us basic trade rights, excluded us from important decisions, and dismissed our contributions as the work of an inferior species. Today we return with a simple proposition: true partnership based on mutual respect. The Xanthari representative clicked his crystal fingers nervously. You speak of partnership while pointing weapons at our homeworld. No weapons are pointed at anyone, Admiral Martinez replied calmly. Our fleet is in standard diplomatic formation. Every ship is broadcasting peaceful intentions on all frequencies. But yes, we are armed, just as every council species maintains armed forces. Jake activated a holographic projector, filling the center of the chamber with a detailed star map. Let me show you what humanity has accomplished during our 5 years of independence. The map displayed the human sphere of influence, which had grown dramatically since their departure from the council. Where once humanity had controlled a handful of systems, now their territory stretched across dozens of star systems, connected by new trade routes and defended by orbital stations. We have established trade relationships with 17 independent worlds that the Council has ignored, Jake continued. We have developed new technologies that solve problems the Council couldn't address. We have built a fleet capable of defending not just ourselves but our allies as well. Dr. Walsh stepped forward. Our medical technology has advanced beyond anything the Council currently uses. Our new treatments could save millions of lives across the galaxy. Our energy systems are 40% more efficient than current Council standards. Our agricultural methods could end food shortages on dozens of worlds. And you're willing to share these advances? Asked the Felinian representative, her cat-like features showing obvious interest. With partners, Jake emphasized. Not with masters who expect us to give away our innovations while receiving nothing in return. Robert Chen activated another display, this one showing economic projections. The human sphere now controls resource extraction operations in 12 systems, previously considered too dangerous or unprofitable for Council development. Our trade volume has increased by 800% since we left the Council. We're not the struggling colony worlds you remember. The numbers were impressive, but everyone in the chamber understood that the real message wasn't economic. The real message was hanging in space outside. Humanity had become a major power whether the Council acknowledged it or not. Speaker Vexlar raised himself higher on his platform. What exactly are you proposing? Full readmission to the Council with equal status, Jake replied. Access to all trade routes, participation in all major decisions, and recognition of human territorial claims in the systems we've developed during our absence. A ripple of shock went through the chamber. The hegemony representative's tentacles writhed in agitation. You cannot simply claim territory and expect us to recognize it. Why not? Admiral Martinez asked. That's exactly how every other Council species established their current territories. The only difference is that we did it recently enough for you to remember. Karen Bell stepped forward with a datapad. We've prepared detailed proposals for each major Council initiative. Mutual defense agreements, technology sharing programs, joint exploration missions, expanded trade partnerships. We're offering to contribute to galactic civilization in ways that benefit everyone. And if we refuse? The Xanthari representative asked. Jake's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a note of steel. Then humanity will continue developing on its own. We'll expand our partnerships with independent worlds. We'll explore new territories and develop new technologies. And the Council will miss the opportunity to benefit from what we have to offer. It was a masterful piece of diplomacy. Jake wasn't threatening anyone directly, but the implications were clear. Humanity was offering to work within the existing system. but they were no longer dependent on council approval for their survival or success. Captain Sam Taylor, monitoring communications from the intelligence ship Horizon, listened to the desperate messages flying between council representatives and their home governments. The Xanthari were calculating how long it would take to move their main fleet to Nexus Prime. The hegemony was trying to determine if their defensive treaties would apply to this situation. But the most telling communications were coming from the smaller council species. Several representatives were quietly asking their governments whether humanity's offer might actually benefit them. The current council structure favored the oldest and most powerful species. A new major power might provide a counterbalance that could help the smaller worlds. Back in the council chamber, the debate continued for hours. Representatives asked detailed questions about human proposals, clearly stalling for time while their military forces tried to organize some kind of response. Finally, Vexillar called for a recess. The council will consider your proposals and respond within 6 hours. Of course, Jake replied politely. We'll wait. During the recess, Admiral Martinez received reports from the human fleet. Several council military units were approaching the system, but they were small forces, clearly unprepared for the scale of the human presence. More importantly, 3 independent worlds had already sent messages expressing interest in establishing formal relationships with humanity. How long can we maintain this position? Jake asked. Indefinitely, Grace replied. We brought our own supply ships and we've established temporary bases in uninhabited systems along our route. We can stay here for months if necessary, but it wouldn't take months. Jake could see the calculation in the alien representative's eyes. Fighting humanity would be costly and uncertain. Accepting their proposals would mean sharing power, but it would also mean gaining access to human innovations and resources. When the session reconvened, Vexillar looked older and more tired. The Council has reached a decision. We are prepared to offer humanity associate membership with limited trading rights. No, Jake said simply. Full membership with equal status, or we continue as we are. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Jake remained calm. He had expected this. The Council's first instinct would be to offer as little as possible, while demanding maximum concessions. You cannot dictate terms to the entire galaxy, the Xanthari representative shouted. We're not dictating to anyone, Admiral Martinez replied. We're simply stating what we're willing to accept. You're free to reject our offer. We're also free to pursue our own interests without Council involvement. It was the critical moment. The Council could choose to fight, but that would be expensive and uncertain. They could choose to ignore humanity, but that would mean missing out on all the benefits of partnership. Or they could choose to accept that the galaxy had changed and adapt accordingly. The final vote was closer than Jake had expected. 412 votes in favor of full human readmission, 390 against, with 45 abstentions. It wasn't the overwhelming acceptance he had hoped for, but it was enough. The motion carries, Vexillar announced, his voice heavy with resignation. Humanity is readmitted to the Galactic Council with full membership status. Jake nodded formally. Thank you. We look forward to working with you as equals. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Admiral Martinez received a signal from the fleet. One by one, the dark warships began powering down their weapon systems and moving into standard diplomatic formations. The message was clear. Humanity had gotten what they came for. But everyone in the chamber understood that something fundamental had changed. The age of casual dismissal was over. The Council would have to learn to work with humanity as partners, not servants, and if they forgot that lesson, the dark ships hanging in space outside would be there to remind them. The galaxy had a new major power, one that had earned its place not through conquest or inheritance, but through determination, innovation, and the simple refusal to accept second-class status. Humanity had left the Council as rejected supplicants. They had returned as equals who commanded respect through strength, preparation, and the proven ability to survive and thrive on their own terms.